I stared at Daniel's computer screen, watching him pitch my revolutionary prosthetic technology to our biggest competitor. 3 years of stolen credit, blocked promotions, and condescending smirks flashed through my mind. But as I quietly backed away from his office, I smiled for the first time in months. He had no idea about the paperwork error that was about to cost him everything. My name is Jessica Bennett. I'm 29 years old, and I was about to discover that my boss had been selling my life's work behind my back. But let me start 3 years earlier, when everything changed for my family. I remember the phone call like it happened yesterday. Marcus, my 16-year-old brother, had been in a car accident. The drunk driver walked away without a scratch. Marcus lost his right arm. Standing in that sterile hospital room, watching him struggle to process what this meant for his future, I made him a promise that would reshape my entire career. I told him I'd create prosthetics that actually worked and didn't cost more than a house. That promise led me to MedTech Industries, where I'd been working as a biomedical engineer for 3 years. Every night, I stayed late in my lab, tweaking sensors and neural connections on prosthetic prototypes. The work was exhausting, but Marcus visited every few weeks to test my latest designs. His face lit up each time the prosthetics responded faster or felt more natural. Those moments made every sleepless night worth it. Then there's my boss, Daniel Harris. 45 years old, perfectly styled hair, and the kind of smile that made you check your wallet afterward. Daniel had mastered the art of looking important while contributing absolutely nothing of value. He'd mastered something else, too, taking credit for other people's work. The pattern started small. I'd present an innovation in our team meetings, and Daniel would nod politely while asking pointed questions designed to poke holes in my ideas. "Are you sure the neural response time is optimal, Jessica? Have you considered the cost implications?" Then 2 weeks later, he'd present those same innovations to upper management as breakthrough concepts he'd been developing. Well, it gets worse. When I applied for senior engineer positions, Daniel would pull me aside with concerned expressions and constructive feedback. "You're brilliant technically, but leadership requires strategic vision. Maybe give it another year." Meanwhile, less qualified colleagues, coincidentally all male, got promoted around me. Makes sense, right? But here's where it gets interesting. My latest creation was different. Revolutionary, actually. I developed a neural responsive prosthetic limb that could interpret complex brain signals and translate them into precise movements. Users could write, play piano, even perform delicate surgical procedures. The technology represented a quantum leap in prosthetic functionality, and I knew it could change everything for people like Marcus. Daniel's eyes practically glowed with dollar signs when I demonstrated the prototype. He asked detailed questions about the neural interface, the signal processing algorithms, and the manufacturing specifications. I thought he was finally showing genuine interest in the technical aspects. Naive? Absolutely. And the weird part is, I actually felt hopeful. Maybe Daniel was beginning to recognize my contributions. Maybe this breakthrough would finally earn me the promotion I deserved. Maybe I could start my own research team and accelerate development of affordable prosthetics. Then I discovered Daniel was scheduled to present his latest breakthrough to the board of directors. The neural responsive prosthetic that had consumed 2 years of my life would be unveiled as Daniel Harris's crowning achievement. The presentation could secure him a VP position while I remained stuck in my current role, watching someone else profit from my brother's pain and my sleepless nights. Let's not forget the real stakes here. Every day Daniel delayed bringing this technology to market meant more families like mine couldn't access life-changing prosthetics. Insurance companies wouldn't cover advanced prosthetics, leaving people with basic mechanical hands that barely functioned. My innovation could change that entire equation. But as I packed up my lab equipment that evening, preparing for another night of refinements and testing, I had no idea what I was about to overhear. Daniel was still in his office, door slightly ajar, having what sounded like a very interesting phone conversation. That phone conversation changed everything. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, heart hammering as Daniel's voice drifted through his half-open door. He wasn't talking to upper management about presentations. He was talking to someone at Titan Biomedical, our biggest competitor. "The neural responsive technology is ready for transfer," Daniel said, his voice carrying that smooth confidence he used when closing deals. "We're looking at full patent rights, manufacturing specifications, and prototype designs, the whole package." My blood turned to ice. He wasn't just stealing credit anymore, he was selling my work. $250 million is our starting point," he continued. "This technology will revolutionize the prosthetics market. Whoever controls it controls the future of biomedical engineering." $250 million for the technology I'd developed thinking about Marcus's struggles every single day. While Daniel planned to cash out, families like mine would wait even longer for affordable prosthetics because he was handing our innovations to a company known for premium pricing and limited accessibility. But wait, it gets worse. Much worse. "Timeline? I'll need 3 weeks to finalize documentation and clean house," Daniel said, and something in his tone made my skin crawl. "Can't have any loose ends or former team members creating complications down the road. You understand?" Clean house. Former team members. He was planning to fire me immediately after the sale, not just steal my work, eliminate the witness. I backed away from his door on shaking legs, mind reeling with the magnitude of his betrayal. 3 years of systematic credit theft suddenly made perfect sense. Daniel hadn't been randomly taking advantage of opportunities. He'd been building toward this moment, carefully documenting my innovations under his name to prepare for one massive sale. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I did what any good engineer does when facing an impossible problem. I started investigating. My first stop was the patent database. Every innovation I'd developed at MedTech should have been filed under the company's corporate account, with Daniel listed as the supervising manager, standard procedure for employee-generated intellectual property. What I found made me physically sick. Patent after patent bore Daniel's name as the primary inventor. My neural interface algorithms, Daniel Harris, inventor. The pressure-sensitive feedback system, Daniel Harris, inventor. Even my early prosthetic joint designs from my first year, all credited to Daniel Harris. The documentation looked legitimate. Transfer agreements bore what appeared to be my signature, moving rights from my personal research account to Daniel's corporate oversight. Except I'd never signed any transfer agreements. Those weren't my signatures. They were forgeries, and pretty good ones. For 3 days, I maintained my normal routine while secretly building a case. I arrived at my usual time, worked on refinements to the neural responsive prototype, attended team meetings where Daniel continued dismissing my contributions. But every spare moment, I was digging deeper into the paper trail of my stolen innovations. Then I found it. The mistake that would change everything. Remember how I mentioned my neural responsive prosthetic was revolutionary? Well, revolutionary technologies require revolutionary amounts of paperwork, patent applications, provisional filings, continuation applications, international protections, the bureaucratic nightmare of intellectual property law. When I first joined MedTech 3 years ago, my corporate accounts weren't fully set up for the first 2 weeks. Standard new employee processing delays. During those 2 weeks, I was so excited about the neural interface concepts I'd been developing that I filed a provisional patent application using my personal research account, just to establish the earliest possible filing date. Daniel knew I'd filed something early. He'd seen the provisional patent in my records when he began his systematic theft. But here's what he didn't know. Provisional patents filed under personal research accounts don't automatically transfer to corporate oversight. They require explicit transfer documentation with notarized signatures and corporate approval. In his rush to steal credit for my other innovations, Daniel had forged transfer agreements for patents that were already in the corporate system. But the neural responsive prosthetic? The crown jewel he was trying to sell for $250 million. That patent was still registered under my personal account. Legally, I owned it, completely. Daniel was negotiating to sell technology he didn't control to Titan Biomedical, and neither party had bothered to verify actual ownership. They assumed that because Daniel was the department head, he controlled all patents generated by his team. Assumption meet reality. I spent that weekend consulting with a patent attorney, confirming what I already suspected. Not only did I own the neural responsive prosthetic technology, but Daniel's attempt to sell it without proper ownership could constitute fraud. The attorney smiled when I explained the situation. Corporate executives assume their legal teams handle these details, she said. 90% of the time they're right, but when they're wrong, they're spectacularly wrong. The next week crawled by as I watched Daniel prepare for his presentation to Titan Biomedical. He reviewed my technical specifications, practiced explaining neural interface algorithms he barely understood, and scheduled the final negotiation meeting. His confidence was almost admirable if it weren't built on stolen work and forged documents. Meanwhile, I was making preparations of my own, not just legal preparations, personal ones. Marcus visited the lab that Thursday, testing the latest prototype adjustments. The neural responsive prosthetic performed flawlessly, interpreting his intended movements with 97% accuracy. He could pick up a paperclip, write his signature, even play simple melodies on a keyboard. "This is incredible, Jess," he said, flexing the prosthetic fingers with obvious joy. "When will it be available for other people?" I watched him experiment with the hand's capabilities and realized something important. My motivation had evolved beyond just helping Marcus. This technology could transform thousands of lives, but only if it reached people who actually needed it, not just those who could afford premium pricing. That's when I made my decision. Daniel wanted to play corporate games with my life's work? Fine, but he'd chosen the wrong engineer to underestimate. Friday morning, I incorporated Bennett Prosthetics as a Delaware LLC. By Friday afternoon, I'd transferred the neural responsive prosthetic patent from my personal research account to my new company. All documentation was properly filed, time-stamped, and legally bulletproof. Daniel's meeting with Titan Biomedical was scheduled for Monday at 2 p.m. He had no idea that the technology he planned to sell no longer belonged to MedTech Industries. In fact, it had never belonged to MedTech Industries. But first, I had some emails to write. Company-wide. Emails that would make Monday morning very interesting for everyone involved. The weekend felt like the calm before a hurricane, and I was about to become the storm that destroyed Daniel's carefully constructed house of lies. Monday morning arrived like Christmas morning, except instead of presents, I was about to deliver the corporate equivalent of coal to Daniel's stocking. I'd spent Sunday night crafting the perfect company-wide email, and honestly, I was proud of my work. The subject line was simple. Regarding patent ownership and professional misconduct, important company information. Professional, direct, and guaranteed to make everyone's coffee taste more interesting that morning. I hit send at exactly 8:47 a.m., knowing Daniel wouldn't check his email until after his usual 9 a.m. arrival. The message detailed everything. 3 years of systematic credit theft, blocked promotions, forged transfer agreements, and his planned sale of technology he didn't own. I included dates, documentation, and specific examples that painted a crystal-clear picture of his misconduct. But here's the beautiful part. I saved the best revelation for last. After explaining how Daniel had been stealing my innovations, I casually mentioned that I was leaving MedTech effective immediately to start Bennett Prosthetics, focused on making advanced prosthetic technology affordable for all families. Then, almost as an afterthought, I noted that I'd be taking my patents with me. No mention of the $250 million deal. No dramatic reveal about the neural responsive technology ownership. Just a simple statement that would make Daniel's morning meeting absolutely fascinating. My phone started ringing at 9:23 a.m. colleagues expressing shock, support, and congratulations for finally standing up to Daniel's behavior. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd noticed his pattern of taking credit for other people's work. Karen from the materials lab had been documenting similar incidents for months, just waiting for someone brave enough to speak up first. Daniel's reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. He stormed into my office at 9:47 a.m., face red with fury, waving a printed copy of my email like evidence in a murder trial. "What the hell is this, Jessica? You can't just send lies about me to the entire company." I looked up from packing my personal belongings with the calmest expression I could manage. "Which part was a lie, Daniel? The forged signatures? The blocked promotions? Or maybe the part where you're planning to sell my technology to Titan Biomedical this afternoon?" His face went from red to pale in about 3 seconds. Nothing quite like watching someone realize they've been caught. "You have no proof of anything," he sputtered, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "And those patents belong to MedTech. You signed transfer agreements." Here comes the fun part. I pulled out a folder containing copies of all the legal documentation I'd prepared over the weekend, patent filings, incorporation papers for Bennett Prosthetics, and most importantly, the ownership records for the neural responsive prosthetic technology. "Actually, Daniel, I never signed any transfer agreements for my most valuable patent," I said, sliding the papers across my desk. "The neural responsive prosthetic system, the one you're meeting about this afternoon, I filed that under my personal research account before my corporate accounts were set up. Legally, I've owned it for 3 years." Watching Daniel read those documents was like watching someone discover they'd been playing poker with Monopoly money. His hands actually shook as he realized what this meant for his planned sale to Titan Biomedical. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Legal reviewed all the patents. Legal reviewed the patents that were properly filed under corporate accounts," I corrected. "But they assumed you'd handled the paperwork correctly. Bad assumption." The next few hours were chaos. MedTech's legal team confirmed my ownership claims. Daniel's meeting with Titan Biomedical turned into an embarrassing explanation of why he couldn't actually sell the technology they wanted to buy. By Thursday, he was facing internal investigation for attempted fraud. Meanwhile, I was fielding calls from investors interested in Bennett Prosthetics. 6 months later, Marcus walked into my new lab wearing a neural responsive prosthetic that cost his insurance company less than traditional mechanical alternatives. Bennett Prosthetics had secured funding, begun production, and filled our first 100 orders for families who'd been waiting years for affordable advanced prosthetics. The real victory wasn't destroying Daniel's career. It was watching Marcus help a 7-year-old girl named Emma learn to use her new prosthetic hand to color pictures for the first time since her accident. But Daniel's betrayal taught me something valuable about being underestimated. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply proving that the person who dismissed you made the biggest mistake of their career. That meeting with Titan Biomedical became corporate legend. Daniel walked into the conference room at 2 p.m., ready to close the biggest deal of his career. 45 minutes later, he stumbled out looking like someone had just explained quantum physics using finger puppets. Turns out, telling potential buyers you don't actually own the technology they want to purchase makes for awkward small talk. MedTech's CEO called an emergency meeting that same afternoon. Daniel tried explaining how this was all a misunderstanding and that surely we could work something out with my patent claims. The legal team's response was basically corporate speak for "you're screwed, buddy." By Friday, Daniel was cleaning out his office. 3 years of systematic theft, and he got taken down by a filing error he never bothered to check. There's poetry in that, somewhere. The best part? My former colleagues started coming forward with their own stories. Turns out Daniel had been running this same playbook on multiple engineers. Karen from Materials Lab had been documenting his behavior for months. Mike from the software team had similar experiences with stolen algorithms. Daniel wasn't just a bad boss. He was running a one-man plagiarism operation. Bennett Prosthetics launched 3 months later with seed funding from investors who loved our mission of affordable prosthetics. We hired half of Daniel's former team, including Karen and Mike. Funny how talent tends to follow talent when given the choice. Marcus became our head of user testing, helping design prosthetics that actually work for real people instead of corporate demo presentations. Last month, he taught a group of kids at the Children's Hospital how to high-five with their new prosthetic hands. Watching them celebrate those first successful movements reminded me why I got into this field. The neural responsive technology that Daniel tried to sell for $250 million? We're licensing it to manufacturers at cost, making advanced prosthetics accessible to families who previously couldn't afford them. Emma, that 7-year-old I mentioned, just started piano lessons using her Bennett Prosthetics hand. Daniel. Last I heard, he was working at a mid-level consulting firm, probably telling everyone how he almost closed a $250 million deal. Some people never learn. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the best career move is standing up to the person trying to destroy your career. Daniel spent 3 years trying to keep me down, never realizing he was actually setting me free. And Marcus? He's planning to study biomedical engineering next year. Guess inspiration runs in the family.